He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with over 26 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love to talk about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back, Henry. Today we have a guest who is visiting San Francisco all the way from the UK, Steve Harrison. He's the author of a wonderful book. He's a legendary creative in his own right. And we'll talk about that more when he joins us. Let's take part of the conversation. All right. Henry, we're back with another episode of the Brief Brothers. And today we have a wonderful guest all the way from the UK who's visiting us in San Francisco. I believe, if I understood him correctly, you're staying with your good friend, Jeff Goodby?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
That's great. So this is Steve Harrison. He's probably best known to our viewers as the author of this wonderful book, Can't Sell, Won't Sell. I'm going to read the subtitle so we get it all. Advertising, Politics, and Culture Wars, Why Ad Land Has Stopped Selling and Started Saving the World. But I also wanted to let our viewers know that while he is a contrarian and he is an iconoclast, but he's also an award-winning and I would say creative legend in his own right, which I don't want our audience to overlook. This is a powerful story, a powerful argument. But I'm just going to read from your own book, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Steve was European creative director for OgilvyOne and global creative director at Wunderman, either side of starting his own agency, HTW, where in the 7 years the agency operated, he won more Cannes Lions, 18, in his discipline than any creative director in the world. His work has subsequently featured in the D&AD copybook. He also has authored Changing the World is the Only Fit Work for a Grown Man, How to Write Better Copy, and How to Do Better Creative Work, the latter becoming the most expensive advertising book ever when it appeared on Amazon for £3,854 a copy. Has that price come down at all, or?
Yes, yeah. There was a bubble, you know.
Okay.
There was how to do better creative work bubble. That was when it was trading secondhand on Amazon. Of course, I didn't get any of that at all. I just got my $5,000 royalties, you know.
Right. Well, Steve Harrison, welcome to the Brief Brothers. Henry and I are delighted to have you.
Thank you for having me, Henry and Howard. Thank you.
You know, when I read this book, and I've got the one with the 6 additional chapters.
Good. Yes.
So this came out in 2020, and the second version came out in 2021. And you've had this is the 3rd edition. So you've been writing and adding to this story.
Yes.
For quite a while. It's a powerful argument, and Henry and I, while we don't specifically point to this book, we agree with the premise.
Right.
But you know, in your own words, Steve, tell us, what is the argument you're making in Can't Sell, Won't Sell? I first came to the issue when a guy called Patrick Collister asked me to make a speech at his John Caples Awards. John Caples Awards is one of the few award ceremonies where the awards have got to have proven to have worked in order to have won something. I've got one.
Yeah, have you got a Caples?
I do.
Good. Well, your heart's in the right place, obviously. And he said, tell me, Steve, why the subject I want you to talk about is why advertising no longer sells. You know, kind of why the advertising community no longer think it's important to sell. And he threw me a bone. He said, Steve, of something like 27 Grand Prix at Cannes this year, only 6 of them had making a sale as an objective.
That was remarkable. That was a remarkable statistic.
Well, that's what it's got worse, frankly. It's got worse. Ben Kay assessed this year's Cannes winners and said 85% of the 43 Grand Prix winners had a social purpose or cause related. So only 15% had a commercial purpose. So it's got progressively worse, the situation. And I started to dig into it. And the first inkling I got as to why this was, well, I was reading a Forbes magazine article entitled something like, Can Progressive Agencies Sell to Conservative Customers? And And it really did raise the question of whether a 85% left-leaning industry, that's the quote, that's the figure that Forbes gave us. 85% of the people who work in the advertising industry in the United States are progressive left-leaning individuals. Could they actually empathize with the basket of deplorables, the 60 million basket of deplorables who had voted for the Dorito-colored candidate? And you know, kind of, and I started to investigate that, and the conclusion that I came was, no, they can't empathize with the people who do not share their progressive viewpoint. This wasn't an opinion that I magicked up out of air. It was, a lot of it was based upon research done in the United Kingdom by two wonderful chaps, Andrew Tenzer and Ian Murray. And if your listeners can download, please, I urge you to download Tenzer and Murray's The Empathy Delusion, Gut Instinct, and the Aspiration Window, as an expose of just how completely out of touch the marketing and advertising industry is in the UK from the mainstream audience. And I would suggest that that situation obtains in the United States, in Australia, in all of the mature advertising markets in the world.
Is that an article that we could link to?
There are three white papers. It's the Aspiration Window was the most recent, the Empathy Delusion, and Gut Instinct. Gut Instinct, and I'll give you a foretaste of what they said, that what they discovered in their 3 award-winning studies of our industry. We find the same basic pattern being reinforced time and again. Advertisers and marketers diverge from the mainstream on every major psychological, behavioral, and attitudinal framework that we have explored. They inhabit 2 different worlds. Okay. And my take on this is that the world we inhabit is a left-leaning progressive world, and we assume everybody shares our political views and our views on how the world works. And also, I'm afraid, share our view that capitalism is at the root cause of every social and cultural problem that we face. Capitalism is the root cause of homophobia, of sexism, of racism. And if you throw the climate crisis onto that rap sheet, you can understand why people rock up every day and they don't want to work on commercial on ads on clients which have a commercial purpose. They've stopped selling and they've started saving the world.
Yes.
So one of the things that really puzzles me, and I agree completely with the premise, by the way, 100%. You're not going to get any argument from me. One of the things that puzzles me is I understand in a way why this would be the culture at agencies.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just in advertising. I see this in journalism as well, where it's very much somebody said something to the other day that made a lot of sense to me. They're like, journalists used to be blue collar guys that smoked cigars and drank beers after
Working
work,
class.
and they were questioning everything that there was official narrative. Today we have these college educated, very demographically narrow, all from the upper middle class and upper class, educated at the same institutions, and there's very little. They champion diversity supposedly, but there's very little diversity of thought within a thinking profession. Which to me is very, very dangerous. But so I get why in the ad industry, you know, it's a creative field. People are going to the same institutions, etc. We're drawing from the same socioeconomic background. But why is it that clients are buying this? Because to me, the agencies can't get away with this unless the clients buy it.
Well, I think quite simply that the clients are part of the same, they're from the same social caste. You know, they've been to the same universities, they've been to the same, you know, kind of, they're part of that clique. They're part of the metropolitan middle class, university educated, white collar elite. You know, kind of they're not recruiting from the mainstream, from the working classes. You know, kind of they're not recruiting blue collar. Right, you know, you've got to be. They have something called the graduate recruitment program. There's a bit of a clue there as to where they're getting their people from.
Graduate schools, yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you would think that they're closer to where some sort of measurement of business results lives, right?
I think that the CMOs are held in absolutely no. I mean, you've seen this. You talked to Mark Ritson. I'm sure he was extremely critical of the standard of chief marketing officers in our industry.
Not just CMOs, Steve. Just the training in the marketing field in general.
Yeah,
but you're right. If the leadership is rotten, you know, and I think that speaks to why CMOs aren't respected in the C-suite, right? Like why the CFO has the CMO on a short leash, because the CFO cares about the numbers, the CMO cares about the cocktail parties.
Yeah, and playing and going to Cannes. This is what Raja Rajamanna wrote in The Drum last November. Raja Rajamanna is the CMO at MasterCard. He said, when chief executives of major companies were interviewed, 70% of them said they have zero to low confidence in their chief marketers and in their marketing teams to be able to drive business growth. Why? The fundamental reason is because when marketers are asked questions like, we have spent so many $1 million on these campaigns, what exactly did the company get by way of return on its investment in marketing? Most of the time, the answers are fluffy, or these folks look like deer caught in the headlights.
Yeah. So your book has been out now, well, I guess honestly, for 2 years since your first edition.
Yeah.
Plus your updates.
Yeah.
Has the situation gotten better, worse, stayed the same? What would you say?
I think it's got better. I think it certainly got better. There were very few dissenting voices 2 years ago.
Did that surprise you?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Did that surprise you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is nobody wants to question, no one who wants to keep their job in our industry wants to question the groupthink. And kind of like people are now, kind of like, it did. And there was probably Ian Murray and Andrew Tenzer who were questioning the groupthink, the guys I've cited. There's a guy called Orlando Wood, who has written a brilliant book called Lemon, Why the Advertising Brain Turned Sour. Mark Ritson was questioning the groupthink, but I think you've basically named the number of people 2 years ago who were actually saying, I'm sorry, but this is largely a large amount of bullshit. I think that things have changed for the better. There's a guy called David Golding. David Golding is our most successful strategist in the UK. He was the founder of Adam and Eve. I don't know whether you're familiar with Adam and Eve, but it was the best UK shop this century. Mm-hmm. He and James Murphy built it up to be, an agency of the year, agency of the decade at Cannes. They left to form New Commercial Arts, and their modus operandi, there's a clue in the name.
Yeah, I love
Commercial Arts.
I love the way they just said, we are commercial artists.
Yeah, that's what, and James Murphy says, look, the industry has been ashamed of what it does. The industry has been ashamed of what it does, and what we do is in our title. David Golding, 2 weeks ago in an interview reminded us all that regardless of whether we are living through boom or bust times, the fundamental task of advertising doesn't change. Its role is to communicate to lots of people the benefits of using a brand in a way that makes it worth the price to be paid for it. Frankly, I'm pleased, and this was in light of the cost of living crisis we're going through. He's saying, how should brands now react. Frankly, I'm pleased to be getting back to making a real difference for our clients and their customers, not just making them feel better about a brand's why, but making them feel motivated to spend precious money because of a brand's what. It's time for advertising to get back to the thing that it was invented to do, create demand in a world of scarce resources. To me, that's the true commercial art. So you've got people like him coming out and saying this stuff, you know, kind of the biggest turning point for me was, if I can find it, was Mark Pritchard. Now, you know Mark Pritchard
Yes.
of Unilever. He's been the biggest cheerleader for social purpose.
P&G.
And how growth and good come together. You can only grow by being good. At the Viva Tech conference in Paris in June 2022, he declared the industry in general has just gone too far into the good and potentially is not paying enough attention to growth. And he said that order matters. Growth comes before good, he said. The order matters, quote, because first and foremost, we're in business. Our job is to innovate on our products. Our growth drives economic good. Growth drives jobs. And it decides the partners you work with, the retailers you work with, and then it enables you to do more good for society and the planet. Force for growth leads to being a force for good. Now more than ever, we need to double down on making sure we have superiority of a product standpoint. This is a big turning point.
I mean, I'm looking at near the end of your book, you quote Paul Feldwick, who was a guest on our show a year ago. He says, as Paul Feldwick explained, quote, any company's, quote, corporate social responsibility, unquote, begins with 1, pay your taxes, 2, treat your employees well, 3, treat your suppliers well, 4, treat your customers well, 5, respect the environment. If you still have more profits than you think you need, invest them in points 2 through 5.
Yeah.
If you're reduced to philanthropy, don't parade it as a virtue.
Exactly. I think there should be a Cannes Lion awarded to the company that pays the most tax. Right, you know, kind of. So if you've paid $7.4 billion in tax this year, then that is that you have done more good for society than all of the people who make films about saving dolphins and porpoises. You know, so there should be a league table. Procter & Gamble have paid $7.4 billion in tax. You know, Anheuser-Busch have paid $5.4 billion in tax. These people should be lauded and made heroes. These are doing good. And the bastards who cheat and don't pay their taxes should be given the shit lion, you know, but they should be outed. They should be outed.
That's interesting. You know, I like you, I talk to college students. I have a regular class that I speak to at the University of Minnesota, which is a big advertising market, and it's a corporate headquarters, many corporate headquarters. Minnesota is actually a larger advertising market than Los Angeles.
Is it?
Yeah, surprising. And I've worked in both cities. So I've spoken to this class. It's creative strategy class, mostly creatives, but students also. They kind of get a feel for what they want to do. They're interested in the industry.
Yeah.
Most of them want to be creatives, but some want to be planners and strategists. So I've gotten accustomed to speaking to them. I think I've talked to this class 10 times in the last many years. The instructor has invited me back. So apparently I haven't fucked up. And we've named him one of our substitute co-hosts in case Henry and I can't make it.
All right.
But I've gotten accustomed to asking a question at the beginning of a class before I answered their questions. I say, can you define what capitalism is for me?
Right.
And they struggle trying to get what it is. One young woman kind of editorialized and was rather a negative, like it's about millionaires who are taking advantage of people.
Of course. Yes.
But when I said I used Henry's definition, he said it's a voluntary meeting of someone with a product and someone who wants to buy the product, and they agree on a price. Now that's a very simple explanation, but it's one that they understood. So I said, do you agree with that definition? And everybody raised their hand.
Yes.
I said, okay, now how many of you would call yourself capitalists? About 4 people raised their hand.
Yes, yes.
And that's when I usually say, well, if you're not comfortable with being a capitalist, you might not be comfortable being in the advertising industry, because we are a huge cog in the development of our economy and playing a role in that. What is your sense when you talk to young people? What is your sense of where their heads are today on that?
Can I just say that no one has made the argument for advertising, the societal good that advertising does by promoting commerce. Nobody has made that argument in our industry for 20 years. Our institutions have failed us, chaps. The Advertising Association has failed us. D&AD has failed us. The One Club has failed us. The Association of American Advertisers has failed us. When was the last time you saw a feature article or a keynote speech made by any of the presidents of these institutions telling people that every time somebody buys something we advertise, somebody else gets paid? When was the last time anybody made that argument? So there's very little wonder that kids, come into the industry and they have no understanding of the societal good that advertising plays. And when you explain it to them, they're nonplussed. They're like perplexed, like I've never heard, that thought never occurred to me. And the ones who argue, who kick back, their only arguments they've learned are 140 characters in Twitter. So if you actually engage them in a discussion about this, they kind of just go, they shut up, because this discussion has never been had. The argument has never been made to them. The point has never been made to them. They associate capitalism with exploitation, manipulation, and eco-destruction. And they've been brought up to believe that. There's a great
quote that I use frequently when I address students as well. And it was from an Argentinian creative director. This is a very famous creative director in Argentina and later in the United States. And he was having, I think, his 30th anniversary, something like that in the industry. And he wrote a long piece, like retrospective on his career. And he went back to early in his career when he was working on the Nestle account in Argentina. Yeah. And he went with a team from the agency to the client's plant, to their manufacturing plant. And the head of the plant came into the room and asked, well, who's the creative head here? And he raised his hand. And so he took him into the room where they were actually manufacturing the ice cream. And he says, these people here work a single shift. And if you make a good advertising campaign, we'll be able to add a second shift of people that will be working here. Yeah. He says, and if you make a fantastic campaign, there'll be 3 shifts here working around the clock and people will be able to feed their families with that. Yes. And then he finishes by saying, don't ever let them tell you what we do is trivial. Yeah. What we do is important. And I think it's so easy to tell it that way, but you're right. We're not telling it that way. Everything that we have that makes our lives comfortable was manufactured by somebody. Yeah. And it was sold in an open market. Yes. Against competitors. We see even we see people who you'd think aren't necessarily aligned with capitalism speaking out in favor of capital. I think Bono came out and said, listen, if it's not for capitalism, we couldn't have raised the millions of people out of poverty around the world that we've raised in the last 20 years. Yes. So yes, is there problems? Do we need to be careful with the resources that we can? Of course, all of those things are true, but it can also be true that the system in and of itself isn't rotten, that there's some people that take advantage of it, that there's some people that don't pay their taxes, that there's some people that are less than safe. Okay, let's talk about them. Let's not paint every brand with a broad brush, because at the end of the day, the reason we can live in air-conditioned comfort and have all the benefits of modern medical science is because we have this gigantic motor of commerce. Yes, that has propelled us in the last 150 years more than man had been propelled in the previous 10,000 years. Yes, of course, yes. But I think, do you not think that I've said that our advertising institutions have failed us and that they will not make those arguments. It isn't just advertising institutions, it is our academic institutions, it is our media institutions, it is our charitable and non-profit institutions that are pushing a
a left-wing and progressive agenda. Now, this is what Herbert Marcuse called the long march through the institutions. And if you look at it, and it's quite true, you know, kind of that our institutions are dominated by a left-wing progressive agenda that can see no benefit in the things that you've just described. You know, kind of they see only the downside in the things that you described. You know, kind of the left, the Marxist left lost the political debate, but realized that politics was downstream of culture. Right.
So Andrew Breitbart said that and you know, was very much a student, learned about Marcuse and talked about it. And so, yeah, you get nothing but nods from me.
There's a reason why it's called the Marxist critique, because that's all they have.
Yes.
Right? There's no example of a successful Marxist economy or country that the left can point to as an example of a counter argument to what's going on.
That's because they've always been undermined by the evil capitalist United States.
Exactly.
It wasn't real. It wasn't real Marxism. It wasn't real.
No, it wasn't the real thing. It wasn't pure Marxism.
It wasn't our best effort here. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mentioned this before we started recording, but I want to say it now while we are recording. I'm wearing this Beowulf shirt on for you, Steve, because you are a slayer of monsters. Those who are familiar with the story of Beowulf. It's an alternate spelling, probably close to the original spelling. But I'm also, you know, this touches on a good chunk of my past career. I was an academic for about 6 or 7 years.
Right.
I taught college, English composition and literature.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a colleague of mine in that department who didn't use advertising as some foil to teach students how to critical thinking, how to look at an ad.
Yeah.
And the advertising became the point of departure between what's being truthful and what's being deceptive. And that was their entree into the entire. Now, you know, there's some ads are more truthful than others, but the premise of their argument was bad boys in the advertising world. That's where they started from. So you're absolutely correct that the institutions, one of which is the academy, academics, has had the most impact, I think, on this left-leaning and the way it's leaked into the rest of society, which began with postmodernism. Everything has emerged from this, you know, from the theories of postmodernism. So why hasn't there been, I mean, you're absolutely right. When I've looked at the responses to your book, a lot of people nod their heads and say, that's a very good point. I haven't really come across a lot of people who are saying, he's nuts. That's not us.
The one thing that surprised me about, when I thought I was going to have to join the WPP, and I don't mean white-coated plastic products. I mean the witness protection program. I thought I'd have to go and live outside the M25, which is the ring road, the beltway for London. But I was really pleasantly surprised by the response that I got. You know, kind of the kickback has been minimal. And so that was to the first part, the first edition of the book, you know, kind of, and so in the second edition of the book, I think I do identify the fact that this whole agenda is being driven by a very small minority of activists and careerists. And I'll give you an example of this. Tim Lindsay is the chairman of D&AD, okay? And D&AD is the, you know, kind of like one of the 2 biggest awards shows in the world, along with Cannes. Tim has been chairman and CEO and chairman now for 10, 12 years, you know. And he was in a podcast, and I recommend you listen to it. It's with a guy called Ben Kay, and Ben's podcast is called If This Is a Blog, Then What's Christmas? And it's his interview with Tim Lindsay. And Ben says, look, Tim, there are a lot of people who agree with Steve out there. There are a lot of people that advertising is on its knees at the moment. And this is not the time for it to be walking away from its commercial purpose. And Tim said, look, he said, I don't care what Steve and his people like that say. You know, kind of, it doesn't bother me. I'm just going to go ahead and do what I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and push this agenda. It's like, it's not your thing, man. You know,
Of course,
kind of
he doesn't answer to a client or to a staff of
exactly.
employees that depend on having the
Yeah.
client for, you
Yeah.
know, to pay their mortgage and pay
Yeah.
their kids' education.
Yeah, well, you will find that a lot of these institutions that are led by like-minded people like Tim are not in the free market, that they
Yeah.
are actually
Right.
subsidized by either the taxpayer or the organizations or the industry which they supposedly represent.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not true representatives of
No,
the
they're not out there in the
Now,
market.
you mention it at the end of the book that you see, you know, reason for hope, and I think you've already alluded to, there's some people that have left the big advertising infrastructure to go out and go forge their own way. There's always been an allure if you're a top agency executive or creative to go out
Yeah.
on your own. That has always existed, and
Yeah.
part of the, you know, part of the career path for a top creative or executive has always been to start your own shop, sell it, and ride off into the sunset with a few $1 million or pounds in your case. But I think what I sense from your book is that some of the motivation is also different, and also the opportunity is different, right? Because if you start your own shop and you're talking to clients about selling their products,
Yeah,
there are going to be a group of clients that are going to be very amenable to that, as opposed to saying, I don't want to hire an agency because all they're going to care about is,
Yeah.
you know, what charitable work can we do, as opposed to like, how are we going to beat the competition?
will it pick up a can, you know, which is the
Yeah.
driving force for, you know, they're bonused on it. The big network agencies, they're bonused on how many awards they win at Cannes. You know, kind of there's something in it for them, and it's how they get to become executive creative director. You know, kind of.
Well, I'm very proud to have won my first Lion this last summer, and it
Yeah,
was
we're very proud.
and it was for an initiative that had a commercial aim, you know, to in
Sure.
advancing of Burger King selling Whoppers, and, you know, creating some buzz around Burger King as a burger brand, as a fast
Right.
food brand. So I'm very happy that it was for something that had a commercial purpose.
One of the few. Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, I think it is encouraging. I think it would be, you know, kind of, if you're a startup agency, I think you've got to promise your client, surely, that you can give them a commercial edge. You know, kind of, I think that if I was starting an agency, that would be my go-to market. That would be my go-to market proposition, I think.
I have another question for you. How has the pandemic changed things, in your opinion?
Well, I'm looking around Goodby Silverstein's offices, and there's nobody here. So I think that's a problem, personally. I think in the UK, the 2-day week, the 3-day week, I think is a problem, because I simply believe that getting on the train, getting on the underground and traveling across London, surrounded by people who are not reading the newspaper you read, who are not talking the language you're talking, who are actually just exposing yourself to people who are not like you, has a beneficial effect. You know, kind of, so going out into work every day actually feeds your mind and it gives you experiences that you need to get back into your advertising, to put you back in touch with the people you're writing for. And I think that working from home just creates a bubble within a bubble, you know, kind of like
exacerbated an already existing problem.
Yeah, you know, the only time you get out is lunchtime to go and queue at the artisan's bakeries for your sourdough bread, you know, kind of, and then you go back home, you know, kind of, and then get on your Zoom call with your colleagues.
It's interesting because I hadn't thought about it, but you're right, because in the absence of that commute, let's say back and through, which is was an enforced commute, right? You were kind of forced to.
Yeah.
Now you're at home, and sure, you still go out, but now it's elective. you go out to hang out with people that are just like you, or that
Exactly.
only, is your kid's soccer team or
Yeah.
what. So now it's all elective as opposed to this forced exposure to the world at large that you
Yeah.
used to have.
You know, Steve, Henry and I, we call ourselves the Brief Brothers, and we talk about lots of things in the advertising industry. We like to come back to the creative brief because that's really
Yeah.
what got us together. And now I see an opening, a segue here to come back to that, because your point here about this commute that puts us in the faces of people, the real world. One of the things that Henry and I talk about that's absolutely required in any really good brief is the ability to empathize.
Yes.
When
yes.
Henry writes the brief, he's a planner. I'm a creative.
Right.
And I wrote the 2 books I've written on the creative brief because I got sick and tired of reading bad briefs, but I just didn't know what is a good brief. So I taught myself.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Henry has showed me, and that other great thinkers have showed me, is that, and I love Henry's description, when he writes answers the question, who are we talking to on a creative brief? He says, I like to create a word picture so that the creatives can put on a costume
Yeah.
of the customer we're talking to and see the world through her eyes.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about a training that I did many years ago for I do a lot of training for the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. I'm on their faculty of the Marketing Training and Development Center. There's something like 80 instructors, and we have 150 workshops on every imaginable topic. And I have a number on creative briefs. So I was sitting in training with this very smart group of in-house advertising agency people about their audience. So who is our customer? It was an entertainment customer, entertainment client. And they were in their agency, and the agency is right smack dab in the middle of the park that is their bread and butter. They're a resort.
Yeah.
And they're debating back and forth. Who is our audience? Who is the customer who uses our park? And I stopped and I said, guys, your office is right smack dab here in the middle. When was the last time you actually just walked out the door and mingled amongst your? And they looked at me like, we can do that? And I said, yeah. And it's not like they're going to say something to you that becomes this brilliant insight for your brief. It's not, it doesn't work that way. But simply by watching them and listening to them and understanding what they have to go through to enjoy the environment that you've created for them, you're just going to get a sense of who they are. But you can't do that. And it wasn't just the isolation of them being stuck in their office, because this was pre-pandemic. But now Henry's question's like, wow, I hadn't thought about this in a while. And we haven't thought about this. When you're stuck at home, or even if it's voluntarily at home, you're even further away from the very people who you're arguing in your book are not capable of really empathizing.
Yes.
So can we get past this, I guess, is my question.
I think that we've got to start. I think my general sense is that advertising has lost faith in its ability to actually reach these people anyway. I think advertising given up. I think that a lot of people who work in it actually have no belief that what they do will have any impact at all, any old how. Overlay that with their political persuasion, they actually aren't bothered whether it does have an impact anyway, because they see consumerism as something that shouldn't be encouraged. And overlay that the sense that they probably don't like those people in the first place, because they're part of the basket of deplorables, or because they're part of those people who voted for Brexit, those kind of the stupid people who voted for Brexit. We've got divided societies here, and the mainstream doesn't sit comfortably alongside the progressive elites who are in charge of the messaging. And I think that there is there doesn't seem that much will on behalf of the supposedly educated, liberal, open-minded, tolerant elites to cut the mainstream any bloody slack.
I've got 3 friends back in Los Angeles where I lived for 20 years. I'm now in Austin, Texas.
Right.
And a lot of Californians have come out here.
Right.
But I have these 3 friends back in California, all of whom call themselves socialists.
Right.
And all of them are millionaires.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's not, as long as they pay their taxes. You know?
I guess, but isn't it ironic?
I don't hold with the idea that if you're a socialist, you basically should use that money to, you know, personally level up. I think you can hold those views, you know, but I take your point. I take your point.
Well, I like, you know, Henry and I said the same thing. We borrow a phrase from a famous chap from your side of the pond, Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
We adapted the phrase. It goes like this: capitalism is the worst form of economics except for all the others.
It's the least worst option. Yeah, it is. It's the least worst option.
And I go back to the very simple premise, and you know, my background was in economics. That's what I got my bachelor's degree in, and I'm a big follower of Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell, and says what other system is there in which all the transactions are voluntary? And that to me is the root good of a market economy. If you don't want to use the C word because it's got a dirty kind of, but a market economy is simply, I have made this. Would you like to buy it? Yes, I would like to buy it. Nobody is forced to work for a given employer. Like I hear people complaining about Amazon, the Amazon employees. I say, you know what? Last time I checked, Amazon wasn't shanghaiing people, you know, handcuffing them and bringing them into the warehouses. Like they put a sign up that says, hey, we're hiring, this is how much we're paying, and people line up to take the jobs. So, you know, given the fact between voluntary and the alternative, I'm going to take the voluntary every time.
Yes, of course. No.
My background is poetry. I should have been a Marxist.
You would think based on what we see in the academy today.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I'm hearing a bit of optimism from you, Steve, but you know, so depending upon the way I ask the question, you're not so optimistic. So are you divided about?
No, I think, I mean, we're all old enough to have seen a new magic bullet being pushed by the advertising industry every 3 years. You know, I go back to direct marketing, customer ownership, you know, kind of like digital, you know, kind of native advertising, influencer advertising. Data is going to be the next thing. It's now the metaverse, you know, and you could say that social purpose is just one of those trends, but it isn't. It's got a political underpinning. You know, this has got a political underpinning. You know, it is merely the articulation of a political ideology. It's the communications wing of, you know, kind of a left-wing political belief, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic in that, at least to this day, we can have this conversation with people like you, with people like Mark Ritson, with others who are seeing the problem and speaking out about it. I'm also, I just kind of, again, my economics background talks about equilibrium, right? Like when something gets out of equilibrium, it's always going to come back. So you're talking in the book about people that are leaving, starting their own agencies, going after it commercially. I think that signals there will be a shift. And you mentioned, you know, Mark Pritchard, he gave the same speech at Cannes this year, basically. And that's putting the world on notice. That's saying, look, the biggest advertiser in the world is saying we've gone too far in this craziness and we've got to rein it in. He said it a lot more diplomatically than that, of course, and a lot more gently. but anybody that was listening understands that that's what he was saying. It's like, we have to sell our products. And then when we sell our products and we do well as a company, then we could do good for all the things that we want to do. But we got to have that priority. So I sense that the pendulum is starting to swing back a little bit. I think that some of these CMOs that don't care about earning money for their companies are going to find themselves out on the street.
Yeah.
I think the CMOs have been marginalized so much by the C-suite. Like, it's about time for them to have really powerful CMOs that help their brands and help their companies, and for CEOs to seek those guys out rather than just assuming that any marketing is going to be wasted money.
Yeah. Yes. No.
So, Steve, you're a direct marketer from way back.
Yeah.
You worked at OgilvyOne, so did I in Los Angeles.
Right.
I freelanced for about 5 minutes at Wunderman.
Right.
on the Jaguar account.
Right.
And I never forgot, because the CMO, whenever he looked at our work, the first question was always, is it the Jaguar green? So we always remembered to get the color right.
Yeah.
What got you into advertising?
Look, good or bad, I'm not quite sure. I was in London. I'd moved down to London and I had no job. And I answered a ad in a secretary's free magazine saying researcher wanted, Ogilvy and Mather. I had no idea what Ogilvy and Mather was. I would like to tell you that I ran away from home at 14 to work in the mailroom at J. Walter Thompson. But I'm sorry, I didn't, And I rock up at this place and they say, would you, why do you think you make a good researcher? I said, well, I've done a lot of academic stuff. And it was one of those things, kind of the MD was from Blackpool, which is my hometown, we talked about Matthews, Mortensen and Moody, which was Blackpool's great football halfback line in the 1950s, not Bartle Bogle Hegarty, and they said, when can you start? And I said, 10 minutes. And I was 30 years of age, I think it was, so 29 or 30. It was nice to be paid, it was sheer necessity.
Well, David Ogilvy had a similar story. Like, he kicked cans for a long time until he found this.
He worked in research for not
but I think he attempted to be a chef or a cook.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like he came straight into advertising.
Bernbach was the same. Bernbach was a late starter. Howard Gossage was a late starter. I think there's a huge advantage in that, and it comes back to your argument about being empathetic. That if at the age of 29, 30, I'd set up a business and had it closed down. My friends had died. I had my heart broken. My family business had gone to the wall. My dad had died. My mum's business went to the wall. I'd been around the block a few times, and the kids I was competing with were 20 years of age and been to advertising college. And so I figured all I've got to do is learn as much as they know now, and I've got and they'll never, and I'll,
they won't catch up. They won't.
They'll never catch me. I'll always be 10 years ahead of them.
Yeah. No, I was 30 when I got my first agency job. My first job out of college was in the front office.
10 years ago.
Yeah. My first job out of college was at a front office of an American soccer club, the Tampa Bay Rowdies, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
So and then I went from there to graduate school and I studied poetry.
Right.
And then I said, I got to pay off my student loans. So I came back and tried to get a job in advertising. And I got my first job as a copywriter.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I figured out was why it was so hard to get a job in the agency world. Once I got my first job and I lost it. So, well, yeah, but now I know who everybody to talk to. So they just jump from one shop to the next.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like, oh, I see. It's hard to get in, but once you're in.
That's something that I tell anyone who's trying to get into this racket. Do not hang out for the job you want. Go and work in the post room. Be the photocopier guy, kind of like be the tea lady, kind of like, because once you're in, you're on the road, you know.
Yeah, I started off because I loved writing long copy,
Yeah.
and they wanted somebody to write brochures. I said, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I ended up going to direct marketing.
The founder of my agency, Zuby, was a high school graduate, a woman, a Cuban refugee,
Yeah.
who took a job as a secretary at a McCann office here in Miami. And 10 years later, she opened her own agency, and now she's in the Advertising Hall of Fame. So
Yeah.
Really?
yeah, she one of the founders of multicultural marketing in the US. So US Hispanic, Spanish language
Yeah.
advertising during a time that obviously was booming.
Yeah.
She saw it actually before in the 70s as it was starting to become a thing. So yeah, and my personal experience, out of college, I went to work for Walmart stores, interacting with consumers, with real people every day. Then I owned my own retail business that went under, had a medical emergency, crisis, divorce, same, you know, and then, you know, ultimately a friend of mine who was working at an ad agency said, hey, you want to come and help temporarily? We're always looking for smart people. And I said, well, I don't know if I'm smart, but I'll certainly try. And I'm making half of what I was making at Walmart right out of college. Walked into an ad agency for the first time without ever contemplating what went on in an ad agency. But I think that they plugged me into different positions around the agency, and that helped me see a holistic view of the industry. I didn't just go into being a strategist. I think that would have been bad for me. I got to really see how the whole agency operated before I started working in strategy. But I had an anniversary last year when I made 25 years in the industry. I sent my friend who's no longer in the industry, the one that got me in, I sent him a text that said, 25 years ago today, I walked into an ad agency for the first time. And he wrote back, will you ever forgive me?
So none of the three of us ever went to advertising college, or
No.
you know, kind of like desperation is a great driver, isn't it? Hey?
Yeah, I have an undergraduate degree in writing, but it's in fiction and poetry.
Yeah.
I took a class in my undergraduate in advertising copywriting, but dropped it because I took an internship with the company that actually hired me, the soccer club. So I just didn't have time to take the advertising class. So I had no background other than I love to write.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, I parlayed that into this career. I had 2 job offers on the table on the day I graduated. One was to take the full-time work at the front office of the soccer club if I wanted it.
Yeah.
Or I had an alternate job offer. I was a student journalist, was the editor of the university newspaper, and the Clearwater Sun in Florida offered me a job as an editorial writer.
Wow. That would be tempting.
Which I turned down. I often wonder what my life would be like today if I'd become a journalist.
That was a good offer.
It was. The same pay, $10,000.
Wow. Gosh. But I think that the important thing is that the three of us came into advertising from the outside, and going to Howard Gossage now, he said, I don't know who it was who discovered water, but it certainly wasn't a fish. And he said it was he called it extra environmentalism. If you come to it from outside of the environment, you see it a lot clearer than those who went to advertising college for 3 years and then came in as graduates. And, you know, what do they know of advertising who only advertising know? You know, I think that's the question.
So what is it about our profession, Steve, that still keeps you going? You still seem to love it. You're still doing it.
I quickly developed a very romantic, it's a little like Henry's view of journalism, you know, the old-fashioned school of journalism, the hard-nosed, you know, hack who, you know, kind of got his copy out on time every day while
questioned everything. And
was a muckraker. He looked under the carpet to see what you know, kind of. So I had this you know, I had this sense about advertising people as well. I liked the romance of it all. I felt that I was sitting in the lengthening shadow of great men and women, you know, and hope that one day I would go in. That day I would go in and do something that would put me in the same, momentarily in the same league as Rubicam and Ogilvy and Bernbach and Goodby and David Abbott and, you know, kind of the great people of this industry. And that's what kind of drove me on. And I did have a romantic image of what our industry was about, you know. And do I still have it? I'm probably still fighting I may be fighting to reclaim it.
And it used to be
retain
fun. And it used to be fun.
Yes, it did, very much so. Yeah.
I tell people, you know what, it beats real work.
Yeah. I had a job in the late 80s in my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a little B2B shop. There's maybe 2 copywriters, and they brought me in, and I was maybe on the job 3 days, and I got my first assignment, and I like to work with my feet up on the table.
Right.
I would have my little notepad. This is before computers were ubiquitous.
Yeah.
I had a little notepad. I was sketching, you know, I was sketching ideas, doodling and writing headlines. And apparently people didn't appreciate the fact that I had my feet up on the table, on my desk.
Right.
What is he doing? Is he actually working? He's got his feet up on his desk.
Yeah.
My creative director came in and said, look, you're doing a good job. I like what you're doing. Just want you to know that people are wondering because of the way your feet are. It's like, that's the way I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people go out to the cafe and sit at the coffee shop all day and think. Some people go to the library. I sit with my feet up on my desk, but it left the wrong impression.
Right, right.
Because, you know, they're not accustomed to working with creatives.
Right, of course.
Pretty harmless.
I got talked to for wearing shorts to the office. And then the pandemic hit, and like now, who knows if I'm even wearing shorts?
I hope you are. I'm not talking to you. I want to.
Yeah. So when you start a new gig, or you're invited in to talk to a potential client to do some new work or a new project, do they talk about this first, or do they talk about what the problem is, and they want to talk with their problem?
Let's say that that work has dried up quite a bit since that book came out, because agencies are loath to have me to be associated with me. So it's, you know, kind of, so if, for example, I critique Unilever, for example, in a LinkedIn post, then agencies who have Unilever as a client don't feel too inclined to be associated with me, or whatever. So work I'm pretty sure that my, you know, kind of bank balance has suffered as a result of writing the book. But I think that's the price you pay for speaking your mind. I think you said that there's been some fairly, you know, kind of prestigious people like Ritson, Tannenbaum, you know, Trott have said good things about the book. And the common denominator with those guys is they all work for themselves.
Yep, I was just going to say.
They're all old enough and possibly secure enough, right, to be able to speak their mind, right? Yeah. You know, kind of, they don't have someone from HR possibly ringing them up and saying, could you just come and have a word?
Yeah.
But they don't have somebody working out when the bonuses are being distributed. They don't have somebody working out when the next promotion is being, you know, kind of, they have no trouble fitting with somebody else's optics, right? Which is, I mean, I spoke to a head, and I will not name him, you know, kind of the head of one of the big holding companies, the CEO of one of the big holding company networks, one of the big, you know, global networks. He said, my entire day is spent on politics now. I cannot get out of this racket quick enough. I cannot speak my mind. I've got to watch everything that I say. you know, kind of like, and I can't get out of this racket quick enough, Steve. It's miserable, you know. So in answer to your question, so that's not really I haven't answered your question. What do I talk about when I speak to my, on the client side? I talk about, what is the problem faced by the people you are trying to sell to, and how does your product or service solve it? That for me is the essence of the brief.
Fundamental.
Yeah.
What is the problem faced by the person I'm writing to, and what is the solution provided by the product or service that I am selling? And that's basically, for me, that is the essence of the brief. And when I set up my own agency, I said, when you go and talk to the client, ask them those two questions. If they can't answer those two questions, tell them not to bother advertising.
Yeah. You know, Henry and I have lamented, perhaps you are aware of a global survey put together by a couple of friends of ours who've been on the show, Matt Davies and Peter Paul von Wheeler, betterbriefs.com, and they surveyed agencies and clients. And one of the startling conclusions that they revealed, which is actually not so startling after all, was that something like more than 60% of marketers admitted that they use the creative process to figure out the strategy. They didn't grasp why they were doing what they were doing. I thought, let's just have the creatives kind of maybe solve some problems for us, and maybe we'll figure it out.
Inefficient and expensive way to do it. And frustrating to the people that are doing the work, because you know you're throwing a bunch of shit on the wall hoping that something sticks.
But how have agencies let them get into that situation? You know,
I mean, we could go back to the whole, you know, the splitting of the media from the creative and all the compensation. We had Giles Edwards from Gasp on recently, and he did a talk last week about different compensation models and performance compensation, which seems much better than what we're doing now, which is, you know, charging by the hour. Like, our incentive is to run up hours instead of solving the problem as efficiently as possible and as good as possible. If you have an incentive-based compensation, well, if you solve this problem for us, you stand to make $1 million. You know, seems to make more sense. But
no one has ever pulled off selling ideas, though, have they? No one's been able to do that, unfortunately.
It's a hard thing to do, and so we're reduced to, you know, blended rates for man hours and things like that. It's crazy.
So Steve, we want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up on about an hour here. I just wanted to ask you, kind of as a wrap up, a 20-something young person comes up to you and says, Mr. Harrison, what's your best advice for me today? Should I get into the industry of advertising? Would you still advise a young person who might have some talent as a thinker or a creative person and problem solver to get into our business?
Yeah, I would tell them to read 5 books. And I'd say if you read 5 books, you'll be amongst the top 10 educated, informed people in our industry. And then I'd say, and actually, if you read 10 books, you'll be a fucking guru. Sorry, you'll be a fucking guru.
Do you want to name those 5? Do you have them off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I'd say, oh my goodness. I'd always start with Ogilvy on advertising. I'd always go for Hey Whipple Squeeze This. I'd always go for How to Do Better Creative Work by me. I would suggest, I mean, these are all desperately old. I would tell them to read John Capel's Tested Advertising Methods, because he made everything make sense for me when he said there are 3 elements you need to get into an ad, you know, news, curiosity, and above all, self-interest. You know, and what would the other one be? Anything by Bob Hoffman.
Okay. Yeah. Bob's been a guest of our show too. So yeah, that's great. Steve Harrison, coming to us from San Francisco. We are grateful that you would share your time with us. Thank you for being on the Brief Brothers.
Thank
Yes.
you. I
Thank you.
thoroughly
Thank you so
enjoyed it.
much.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Henry.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.